everyone, it's Shel C from PaperOcotilloStudio. Today I'm sharing with you a bonus video using the black watercolor paper that I used in my previous video. I mentioned that I was going to try it out with stencils. So I decided to use some StencilGirl Stencils in 6x6 size to experiment with this, and it worked out really well. I thought these might make fun abstract backgrounds for my abstract August next month, but instead I decided to turn them into some more thank you cards. I will list the stencils that I used and of course all the products, but the stencils in particular numbers below the video so that you can find them at Stencil Girl Products if you would like to purchase them. So I started out with my Arteza half pans that I created myself. It's 24 colors of the 60 that I have of their watercolors in one of their empty pans. And I put the stencil down, and it's kind of like a shattered glass stencil or something. Put it down, took a watercolor brush that holds a lot of water up in its ferrule. It's a fat, juicy brush. I made sure that I got a lot of juicy color, and then I just patted it over the top of the stencil. Not scratching, not rubbing, not swooshing, just patting to put the color on. As we all realize, watercolor is going to run under the stencil. It's not acrylic. It's too fluid to stay neat and tidy. So if you're a neat and tidy stenciler, this technique is not for you. You need to just stay away from watery things like watercolor and acrylic inks and things. But it makes a really cool effect. And what you need to do is you put the stencil over and get it wet, and then you just leave it. You just set it and let it dry overnight before you pull the stencil off. You can also do this with acrylic ink. Acrylic ink, but also alcohol ink. Really cool backgrounds, very, very painterly and loose and flowy. And the stencil makes darker lines even though some of the water might have went underneath. So for the second one, I used the Koi watercolor set. If you didn't watch the previous video, I talked about all these different watercolor palettes that I have and why I picked these ones to try with the black watercolor paper, because they are some that are more opaque than some of my other ones. So then for the last two, I used the Gamzai Tambi ones from Sakura, which I think work the best probably on the black watercolor paper. These seem to be making me happy with the black watercolor paper. On these last two, I put a second layer after I had put the first on. I put a second layer of the metallic colors that come in this particular set. I put the goldish bronze one on this tangled web looking stencil, and then for this other one I put some silver over the top, and I'm really glad I did, because if that one didn't have the silver, I think it would have been too dark. So another thing that I did that's not on the video is I took a piece of rice paper and cut it into pieces, and then I laid the dirty stencils with the watercolor on them on my paper and laid the rice paper over the top, and then I spritzed the whole thing with a water bottle and let that rice paper absorb the watercolor that was still on the stencils, and it helped to clean the stencils as well as making some more interesting collage parts. I did take that rice paper and put some fluid matte medium over it and then run a brayer over the top so that those will be ready for collage sometime in the future. I didn't want to just put them away and then not remember that it's watercolor and it's not sealed, and then go to collage with them and get a smeary mess, because watercolor will reactivate even 10 years from now, and those are in my drawer and I decide to use them, perhaps. So I did seal them up. So for this first one that kind of looks like shattered something, or maybe it looks like foliage, I was looking for this rusty red color as a layer. Oh, I cut up some cardstock. If you have 8.5 by 11 cardstock and you cut it in half and fold it in half, that makes a 4 1/4 by 5.5 card, which fits into an A2 invitation envelope. So it's a very standard size card and easy to make with 8.5 by 11 paper. So I have these black pieces that are smaller. They end up being too small to just put a layer right on a card base. So I wanted to layer them up with another color of cardstock underneath. And I think that makes them look more interesting anyway. And more interesting than the ones I did yesterday, which you guys saw in the previous video. But those pieces of paper were larger. And these, because the pad is 8 by 10, I end up with a smaller piece if I cut it into 4, because that ends up being 4 by 5. So I trim it down to 3 3/4 by 5 to make my layers. So anyway, I was looking for this rusty red cardstock for a layer on this, but I didn't have the large enough piece. But I found this piece in my stack of papers that had been die cut out of a strip of this paper, and then left. I die cut it and then took some of the letters out to use for whatever project it was, and left the rest of it. And I thought it would make an interesting layer over the top to be kind of a focal on this. And this card is my favorite of all the ones that I made. This is my style, more than just the real basic ones that I normally make. I don't spend a lot of time card making anymore. These are just to send out to people who've donated to my channel. So people click that PayPal donation button below, and if they add their address to their PayPal, I can send them a card and probably an ATC or tag or something as a thank you, which I get around to about every 2 to 3 months. I'm pretty slow at getting around to it, but I do get around to it eventually. So I did glue that layer on using my new glue thing that Peg sent me. It's from Nouveau, and it's called a smooth glue applicator or something like that, but it has this little depression tip, and you just dot 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 onto things that have small areas and are tricky to glue down. Works really great for that. So I'll link it in the description box below the video with all the other materials as well, if I can find it. So for my second one, this was the one that was made with the Koi watercolors, and they do dry down very matte, and they do soak into the paper more than the other two, I think. You don't get that as much of that pigment on the top. So this one was pretty dark, and I decided that the way that I would manage the darkness is to do some doodling over the top. So I got out a fine tip white Posca pen. This is my favorite pen, acrylic in a pen. And I traced around the shapes that I could see. This stencil is really cool. It's got a lot of cool stuff on it. This fern and a flower and dots and swirly things, and they deserve to show up. So I traced around them, and then also added some other mark making dots and dashes and things to fill in some spaces that didn't really have anything. And I think it turned out cool. I'm not much of a doodler. I don't doodle and draw and Zentangle and all that stuff very much. But this type of a thing is easy to do because the lines are already there. So you can just kind of draw around things and it becomes pretty cool looking. So this one has blues and turquoise and red, and I decided to layer it onto those colors. I got a piece of burgundy colored cardstock, folded that in half for the card base, and then I found a blue colored paper for the layer to go underneath the black one. But when I was looking at it, it was all too dark. So I got out one of my Arteza acrylic paint pens. It has a lot fatter nib, and so it makes it easier to do this drawing around the edge of the black paper, the black watercolor paper, to make the edge white so that it'll stand out against that blue background that I'm going to glue it to. My pen was dirty, so I had to clean it off on my underpaper. For some reason, it had blue on it. I have no idea why. So then to add a little bit to this card, I used some synthetic raffia. Raffia used to be this natural fiber that was dyed that everyone was using. I don't know, was it in the 90s sometime? It was a big thing. Everybody had raffia for everything. Um, but this is like a synthetic made out of plastic version of it. And it's kind of a green teal color, which matched the others. So I tied a piece of it around the card layer before I glued it on. And then I used that piece that was tied around to add a double bow over the top to just make some interest on the front of the card. And I think it turned out well. It's pretty dark. These are wintry, fall-y colors, not summer colors. I don't coming out with all this dark stuff now. Then I had a little bit of that scrap left over that I used on the first card, and I used a Stampin' Up stamp. All the stamps you see today are Stampin' Up. They're probably all discontinued. They're from years and years and years ago, but this one says thank you very much. It's kind of a typewriter looking font. Stamped that with black and glued it to the front of the card underneath the fibers, and that card is done. So there you have your close-up. That's what it looks like. It's kind of cool. I like it. So for the next two, I had used the Gamze Tambi colors with some of the metallic, and this one had the metallic gold color on it, or maybe the bronze. I'm not sure which one, but you can see that I'd put that layer over the top. And when you see the close-up, it's shimmery and it highlighted some of the lines of the stencil really well. It kind of, fell into the edges and made an interesting look, but it's very subtle. So I have this goldish colored paper layer, and then I decided to add a gold organza ribbon and some gold metallic thread onto it. And this sometimes happens. The layer, what I want to highlight is the stenciled background, right? And I put too much froofy stuff on this. One little tip, if you want to have torn layers, and you've got your two layers cut, you can line up the edge of the two layers and tear them all at once, and you'll end up with a nice matched look there like I did at the bottom. I like to tear things. I tear up my stuff all the time for collage and for art journaling. So I'm tying on all these froofy gold bows, which I think are so pretty, and I got everything on there, and then I decided it was way too much. It was overwhelming the background, and the background is what's interesting on the card. So I ended up cutting off that gold metallic thread after all this fussy tying. But I just wanted you guys to see that sometimes that happens. And it's okay. You can cut it off. It's just a little bit of gold thread. You can throw it away, or you can save it for something else if you must, because it was too much. So I stamped that same stamp on the area of the card base that's exposed down at the bottom. I ended up taking the gold metallic thread off and trimming down the gold organza even a little bit shorter, and it's much better. Much better. That one's got a subtle background, so we don't want to overwhelm it. It looks just pretty enough. So I hope you guys are enjoying the video. If you are, please remember to give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment or question below. You can subscribe, turn on your notification bells if you are already subscribed, because that's helpful. You can share this on Pinterest or Facebook. All those things help my channel by helping other people find me through recommendations on YouTube. So this one is the one that has the really interesting palm tree silhouettes. And I didn't want to do too much to it because I wanted the palm tree silhouettes to show up. So I layered it onto some teal colored background because that's the kind of the colors that are in there. I went around the edge of that background with a black ink pad so that it would stand out from the white card base that I'm going to put it on. And then I stamped this circular stamp that says just a little note of thanks just for you. And I punched it out with a round punch and then punched a slightly larger round piece to layer it with that is a slightly larger round punch. So you can layer them together. And I glued that on. It looked just a little bit too boring. So I got out the watercolors and a water brush and just added a little bit of wash of color onto it so that it matches those same colors in the background. And I thought that was much better. This is the one where I put the silver as a second layer of watercolor over the stencil, and I really think that it made those background silhouettes stand out a whole lot more than if I hadn't done that. It would have been very dark and kind of subtle like the other one. So then I just glued this one to a white piece of folded cardstock, and that's my fourth card. I hope you liked them. Thanks. Bye-bye.